Can we just clarify the role of Mr. Williams? Since the Hutton report, the document's been released of a draft prepared by him, his press secretary in the Foreign Office. Now, some people have described this as a first draft of the dossier, but would you say that was fair?
No. Well, as I understand it, and I don't recall ever seeing it, doesn't mean I didn't, but I don't recall ever seeing it, and I think that was John, you'd have to ask John Williams this, and I can't recall whether he was asked about it at the Hutton inquiry, but that was John Williams, in a sense, putting what I think was described as a frontispiece to one of the papers that you referred to that had been produced within the JIC earlier. Once we got to September the 5th and then September the 9th, it was anything that anybody had written before, frankly, was to be used by John Scarlett as he saw fit. But I did not see that as a draft dossier.
Okay. And when Sir John Scarlett passed you the first draft on 10th of September, I think he referred to considerable help from John Williams. So perhaps he'd drawn...
No, I think, and can I just emphasise, for the sake of... I'm not remotely criticising John Williams in this. He was totally legitimately wanting to help in terms of the building the arguments, in terms of making sure that all the presentational aspects were right. But there came a point within the process, and I remember at one point Jack Straw phoned me up and said, look, John obviously worked very, very closely with the Foreign Secretary, and Jack, again, being very, very helpful, he just said, look, if you want John Williams full-time on this, writing it, then he's there. And that is in that spirit that was being offered, not as it were a kind of turf war trying to grab this thing away from the JIC.
Okay. When this first draft was distributed, which John Scarlett said had drawn on all the available intelligence identified so far, the response from some of the people, should we say, on the presentational side, was a bit disappointed. There's an email string of the 11th of September that starts with Daniel Pruce, who wants to play up more the nature of intelligence sourcing. Then Godric Smith, a PM spokesman, comes in, worrying it's a bit of a muddle, needs a lot more clarity. And then it comes to Phil Bassett, I think worked for you.
He was a special advisor to the Prime Minister.
Good work for you. Who agreed it should be written more in officialese and less journalistic. It needed more weight and more that was new. Crucially, he complained, it's intelligence light. It feels like this is the least possible intelligence material that the intel people are prepared to let go, despite the fact that we say that it's everything the government knows on this issue, which it clearly isn't. Now, this sort of reads as if the presentational team couldn't believe that the intelligence material was so thin.
Well, that may have been their honestly held opinions, but I didn't agree with them. I actually thought that the paper that John Scarlett produced on September 10 was it certainly had, I thought was a very, very good piece of work. So, as I said at the Hutton inquiry, they're all perfectly entitled to make those points, if that's their opinion. But ultimately, it would not be their decision as to what went in, or indeed what the overall structure. But
it's relevant in terms of being concerned about making the maximum impact.
Yeah,
because if this was their reaction.
Well, I think that is relevant, and I think it's interesting, of course, that when the Prime Minister wrote a note to I think it was one of his Monday morning notes that I referred to earlier, and he said on the dossier, the expectations must be right. I've dated it. It says, remember the case we need to make is for the return of a tough inspection regime, not that he's about to launch a strike. Now, if people were expecting a document that said, we're all going to be sitting cowering in our homes because Saddam Hussein's about to launch off nuclear weapons at Peterborough, that was not what was being said. And therefore, and again, I think the Button report pointed out that when the dossier itself was published, lots of the media said it was very dull, it was very cautious, nothing much new. But we never wanted it to be anything other than setting out people talk about it being the case for war. It was not the case for war. It was the case why the Prime Minister had become more concerned. Now, if somebody in the press office thought that it wasn't this and it wasn't that, fine. But I thought it was a very, very solid, serious piece of work.
It's not just a question of the nature of the threat it's presenting, because, as you say, this wasn't necessarily a threat assessment. It was an assessment of the evidence.
Yeah.
But it was a sense that, you could say that they were assuming that what they were seeing was the tip of an iceberg in terms of intelligence material, but actually there was nothing below the water, that this was actually all that there was. And so what they were drawing attention to was the problem that whatever the message, the intelligence on what seemed to be based, at least which had been shown in that draft, was thin.
Well, they were entitled to that view, but I didn't share it.
But on that evening of the 11th of September, you met with John Scarlett, and after that meeting, a note went round reporting, I guess, on your views. It says, it states that number 10, through the chairman, want the document to be as strong as possible within the bounds of available intelligence. So this is urging more to be done, looking for more material.
I think there was a process, like there is with any such publication, where, and as I said to you earlier, I think that was the point at which John came to me and said, look, I need presentational advice and support in this, and that's what I gave. But I think, as John Scarlett also made clear many, many times at the Hutton inquiry, at no time did I ever ask him to beef up, override any of the judgments that he had, and so forth. So it was, and what's more, I think that the JIC wanted this document to be as strong and complete as possible as well.
But one of the problems that comes into focus as you're taking an intelligence community which in its normal workings is very tentative, is very cautious, has these fine degrees of probability with which it uses to qualify its judgments, and the world in which you're involved, which is much more definite, geared to the news cycle and so on. Bringing these two into line is bound to affect in some way the way that a normal intelligence product would be presented.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think that, look, is it the normal stuff of intelligence officers' work to be engaged in that kind of production? No is the answer to that. But they weren't really normal times, and you were in a situation where on this particular policy, as it evolved and developed, this did become, I mean, the Prime Minister, he's the Prime Minister, he's conscious of the fact that he's got an incredibly difficult and serious decision that he's going to have to make, a set of decisions that he's going to have to make as this process evolves. And I think he was just in a position of saying, well, here I am, I see this intelligence, I am becoming more and more concerned that we are going to have to face up to this, and we are going to have to deal with it, we're going to have to stop turning a blind eye to it, and he wanted to share that with the public. Now, once he's made that decision, as the Prime Minister, and ultimately the head of the intelligence services as well, then where I sit, I have to kind of do my part of that, the job that follows from that, and they have to do it. But at no point did anybody from the Prime Minister down say to anybody within the intelligence services, look, you've got to sort of tailor it to fit this argument, that argument. It just never happened.
But the pressure